And now we are discussing the causes and the conduct of the Civil War in the United States. When we have a discussion period, I'll indicate to you some ideas I have of the possibility of continuing the lecture series. Taking nothing for granted, as I've learned to do after some years of teaching American youngsters, we are referring to the Civil War in the United States. And this occurred between 1861 and 1865. The combatants were the Confederate States of America, a construct that I'll explain to you, and the government of the United States. For a 19th century war, the killing ratio was quite high. 500,000 young men died. Keeping in mind the very primitive weapons that our grandfathers and great-grandfathers were able to use, and remembering that they didn't fight in the rain and rarely fought at night, and therefore winter campaigns were more or less useless, and so there were severe limitations on when you could go about killing each other. Also, there was no aircraft. There were balloons which were used for intelligence gathering. The artillery was very primitive. It was solid lead shot, so that if you kept your head and the thing was coming at you, it had a very slow velocity. All you had to do was step aside about 100 feet, and the thing would land, and that'd be all right. Artillery was mostly for battering and also for setting cities on fire. But the anti-personnel, it was almost useless, unlike World War II, in which the field artillery did most of the killing. So killing 500,000 in 4 years, much of it through disease after being wounded, was quite an accomplishment, if that's the right word. So that's what we are seeking to comprehend. This fratricide, or this war, this Civil War. You remember the American Revolution partook of something of a Civil War in its character. Tory versus Loyalist. And so it was a civil war within a revolution. This is a revolution within a civil war. We will begin by attempting a definition of the Civil War in the United States, which I will give you slowly, and which has been arrived at after about 50 years of thought. The Civil War in the United States was an attempted counter-revolutionary coup by a desperate slave-holding oligarchy. An attempted counter-revolutionary coup by a desperate slave-holding oligarchy. This is the nature of the source of the war. One thing that definition does right away is to place the onus for the war where it belongs. The war is begun maliciously and conspiratorially by the slave-holding oligarchy, which amounted to certainly not more than 300,000, probably around 200,000 large plantation slave owners. They did it. They began it. The question arises, in order to understand the source of the war, why did they do it? The key word in the definition which I have offered you is the word desperate. That it was an attempted counter-revolutionary coup by a desperate slave-holding oligarchy. This leads to the next question: what induced the desperation? A ruling class will resort to force and violence in order to prevent its demise or to postpone it. When that class has come to the decision that no other means will do, that the old method of rule no longer works, and that the threatening future must be drowned in blood, and then it will be prevented for a shorter or a longer period of time. When a reactionary ruling class has come to that decision, it resorts to force and violence. This is historically the source of force and violence in revolutionary transformation. The source comes from reaction, not from the forces of revolution. I know no exception to that. And it is true here in what we call the Civil War. Because this counter-revolutionary coup ends in revolution. And counter-revolution can be suppressed only through revolution. Only revolution deals the death blow to counter-revolution. So that which begins as a counter-revolution by a desperate slaveholding oligarchy terminates with the revolutionary transformation of the society of a United States. That is to say, the confiscation of $4 billion worth of constitutionally held property, slave property, without compensation to the owners. A revolution in the country. Necessary if the counter-revolution is to be suppressed. One of the basic lessons taught by the abolitionists and finally acceded to by a hesitant industrial bourgeoisie led by the Republican Party, namely, the source of the counter-revolution is in chattel slavery. If it is to be crushed, chattel slavery must be eliminated. Hence, the salvation of the Union requires the emancipation of the slaves. The emancipation of the slaves requires the salvation of the Union. A dialectical unity, willy-nilly, mostly nilly, realized and achieved after 4 years of terrible slaughter. That's the definition. What are the sources of the desperation of the slaveholding oligarchy, which leads its predominant components? Because, of course, there is difference of opinion amongst them, which leads the predominant component to decide on war, murder, treason. You will note that the only serious resort to force and violence in the history of the United States comes from reaction. There are 4 great forces which induce this desperation. I will give them to you for the purposes of the tape here, and then I'll put them on a board, and we'll look at them. One what? One of 4 forces inducing desperation in the minds of the slaveholding oligarchy, leading them to conclude murder, else we are undone, to quote Macbeth. Number 1, the very significant socioeconomic transformation in the North and the West, particularly after 1840, from 1840 to the election of Mr. Lincoln. By the way, that was in November 1860. 2, the qualitative and quantitative growth, the two went along together, dialectically intertwined, the qualitative and quantitative growth of the abolitionist movement. So that by the 1850s it is a genuine mass movement involving hundreds of thousands of people who consider themselves abolitionists. Abolitionists. Hundreds of thousands. And the movement had reached the point of shedding Garrisonian sectarianism, pacifism, anarchism, illusions about the effectiveness of moral suasion exercised upon the slave owners, and had developed to the point of understanding, as Frederick Douglass insisted, that power yields only to power. Nothing is achieved without struggle. The slave owners hold power. They will be overcome not by moral suasion, although that doesn't do any harm. They will be overcome by superior power, by the achievement of political power. We must transform the parties and alter the political relationship. And third, epitomized by the immortal John Brown, yes, there must be moral suasion. Yes, there must be political action and political struggle. And there must be militant abolitionism. There must be the right to resist by force, the force and the violence of the slave-owning class. That if our forefathers, led by George Washington, had the right to resort to revolution against Britain because of taxation without representation, because of unfair commercial regulations, if they had the right to do that, if Bunker Hill is justified, if the sacrifice of Valley Forge is sacred, then what of the slaves? Who can deny them the right to take, by whatever means necessary, their humanity? No one can deny this right except a racist, except one who affirms that black people are not people, and therefore they, unique among the human beings in the world, have a right only to be slaves. No. They are people as other people, and they have the sacred right to be free, and no one has the right to own them and to sell their children like dogs. And therefore they have the right to do whatever, in their opinion, they should do to regain their humanity. Therefore we stand foursquare with militant abolitionism, resistance by force, if necessary, to the force and violence of the slave-owning class. Slavery is forcible holding of people to labor. That's what it is. Getting them by force, keeping them by force, ruling them by force. Therefore, resist them in any way possible is righteous. And that's the teaching of John Brown, and that is the ultimate point of the abolitionist movement. And they had reached that point by the 1850s. That's what I mean by qualitative growth. So that you had a vanguard en masse and mature, with no naivete, no illusions, and strengthened by a generation of battle. That's the second force. And it was brought home to the slaveholding class by the impact of John Brown. That the North stopped, that the North wept, that the church bells rang, that the mothers brought their children to see the casket, to weep with the widow, a revolutionizing of the population, terrified the slave owners. Third, went an intensification of the antagonisms within the slave system. As the war impends, I get warm. Intensification of the contradictions within the plantation system, meaning what? The system was an oligarchic one. Very few owned very much. Most of the land was owned by a fraction of the population, like in El Salvador, in the Philippines, in Pakistan, and other democracies. Very few owned most of the slaves. So it was an oligarchy. Now the tendency of this plantation system was to intensify the oligarchic character of the system. As the years passed, a smaller and smaller percentage of the slave owners owned more and more. So that, for example, in 1850, 1 out of 3 of the southern white population had a connection, direct or indirect, with slaveholding. In 1860, 1 out of 4. Falling within the decade from 35% to 25%. An enormous speed in the intensification of the oligarchic tendencies of the plantation system, which did what? Which intensified the class conflict inside the South. The slaveholding South was characterized by class conflict. I'm talking about white people. Class conflict between the non-slaveholding whites and the slaveholders. In fact, that's what the politics of the South is about, except for retaining the slaves. That's the two subjects. That's what it's about. And in my study, Class Conflicts in the South, 1850 to 1860, which I wrote under the name Beale when I was an organizer in Georgia in 1939, and published in 2 issues of what was then called the Communist, now called Political Affairs. Somehow we used to speak more plainly in the 30s. Although, please note, I used a pseudonym in order to survive. If you will study that in the book by Roger Shog, The Origins of Class Struggle in Louisiana, for instance, and the sources given in both places in the literature since, there is no question of the intense class conflict characterizing the slave South, which reached its most intense state between 1850 and 1860, so that workingmen's parties were formed, for instance, in North Carolina. So that the politics of the South revolved around the challenge to the existence of the oligarchy by the non-slaveholding whites. Now, they never did reach the point of unity between the non-slaveholding whites and the slaves. If they had, slavery would have lasted 2 weeks. But they didn't. But there is enormous evidence of this intensification of class conflict, so the slave owners were worried, as I show in my work. And I think it's in the book that Bettina put together. Yes, starting on page 48. So that the slaveholders were worried as to whether they would retain their control of Louisiana, of Mississippi, of Virginia, the Carolinas, of Georgia, never mind Washington. And this fact intensified the sense of desperation on the part of the slave owners. And the fourth force was the increased disaffection among the slaves, who constituted 35% of the population. As I have told you, resistance characterized the slave's existence, slave history. It is resistance, not acquiescence. The most intense single decade of resistance probably is 1850 to 1860. The nearest competitor is 1790, 1800. More slaves fled together, more arson, more poison, more individual attacks, more conspiracies, more uprisings, and more terror amongst the slave owners. Paroxysms of terror, paranoia, fear, pistols under the pillows, speaking French at the dinner table, to keep the word from Africa, as though the blacks can't learn French. Terror. And again, heightened by John Brown. A nightmare haunting us for generations has now come into being. Haiti is here. War, therefore, against that damned abolitionized North. We have nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. If we fight and lose, if we don't fight, we lose. If we fight, we might win. If we don't fight, we lose. Any time a ruling class comes to that decision, it's blood. Without mercy, characterizes all reactionary ruling classes. They will hang all their grandmothers on meat hooks and see them bleed to death slowly and give up their power and their wealth. History teaches nothing else. Be not filled with illusion, no matter how the great prevaricator smiles at you through the tube. Merciless he will be. Merciless he is. He says he is a contra. He says it. About the only true sentence he has spoken in the last 5 years. Those are the 4 sources of desperation among the slave owners. There's a 5th. The 5th is the interpenetration of the 4. Because all life is dialectical, all life is filled with interpenetration. It is not discrete, it is not formal, it is dialectical. And so 1 affected 2, and 2 affected 3, and 3 affected 1, and 4 affected 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4 was one thing which the slave owners saw. I've given it to you one at a time because I have one mouth, and you have one hearing device. But that's not the way it was. It wasn't one at a time. It was all together. It was a workingmen's party in North Carolina and this crazy John Brown and the slaves rebelling and the intensification of the oligarchy. And this baboon from Illinois named Lincoln, he's going to be president of the United States. The world's coming to an end. Goddamn nightmare. Destroy it. Drown it. All happening at once, you see, interpenetrated. Let me spell out one of these things, this socioeconomic transformation in the North. What does it mean? What does it mean? Well, one thing it means is a qualitative growth in the industrial bourgeoisie and the proletariat and the working class. One can't grow without the other. The working class is appalled by the propaganda of slavery by the slave-owning class. Appalled. And more comes to understand, as Marx said, labor in a black skin that is branded means labor in a white skin cannot be free. The growth of industrial capitalism, so what? What does that mean? Well, it is a fundamental source in the creation of a new political party, a third party, the Republican Party, a radical party, forgive me. Organized in 1854, fields a national ticket in 56, almost wins, and wins in 1860. Wins with a minority president. We will see how that comes about. Lincoln gets a minority of the votes, but most of the Electoral College, and therefore is legally president of the United States. Now this rising industrial bourgeoisie, what do they want? One thing they want is a protective tariff. Why? Because industrial capitalism comes late to the United States. It comes after Great Britain and after Germany and after France, and therefore it cannot conquer a national market. And without conquest of a national market, there is no solid homegrown bourgeoisie. You must conquer your own market. You must dominate your home market. You don't dominate that, what the hell do you dominate? But the shoes come from Great Britain, and the dishes and the furniture come from Germany, and so on and so forth. And they conquer, they have the market. Now how are you going to keep them out, coming late as you do? With a protective tariff. What is a protective tariff? You're going to raise the price of the imported goods. And in this way you will gain control of your market. The slave owners say over our dead body, we're not manufacturers. We don't manufacture finished products. We buy finished products. We sell raw material. We sell cotton, sugar, rice, and tobacco. You have tariffs, they'll put tariffs on the raw material. You have tariffs, we have to pay more for our shoes, for our furniture, for our machinery, and so on and so forth. What for? To make you rich? To hell with it. We don't want a protective tariff. We must have a protective tariff through collisions. Platform of the Republican Party, a protective tariff. And you get a protective tariff in the first administration of Mr. Lincoln, not before, but in his administration you get it. We demand transcontinental railroads, turnpikes, canals, bridges, to open up this enormous continent, to really make it a market. There are millions of farmers coming in from Ireland, from Denmark, from France, from England, from Scotland, and so on, and they're coming here. What a gold mine. Every family requires everything, and we are ready to sell them everything. But we can't bring it to them. We must have a communication and transportation system. And how are we going to get it? Federal government will pay for it. Of course. We're rugged individualists up to a point. Not too rugged and not too individual. Let the government pay for transcontinental railroads. Let it pay who? Us. Why? Because we'll build the railroad. What do you mean we'll build it? That is, we'll own what goes on. Never mind who builds it. Everybody knows who builds it. The workers build it. But don't say that too loud. So we'll form the Southern Pacific, the Northern Pacific, the Central, and so on, and we'll build the railroads if you give us the money and give us the land. Never say the slave owners. First of all, we're not the builders of the railroads, you are. We don't own Pittsburgh, you do. You make the steel, we don't make the steel. You're going to have a high tariff, you're going to have the government subsidizing your building and so on, and you're going to make a lot of money. What the hell are we going to make? Nothing. Therefore, we don't want it. We don't want to pay taxes to build turnpikes and so on, United Railroads. Therefore, you don't have it. And you don't have it until Lincoln is President of the United States. And as soon as he becomes President of the United States, you give away hundreds of millions of acres. The federal government gave away as much land as there is in France to the railroad corporations. Hopkins, Stanford, Crocker, and other Bay Area gangsters. The Crocker Bank, Stanford University, and so on. That's the families. That's the great pioneers. Those are the ones who built the country. That is, we gave them the country and they built it. By the way, you not only gave them the trackage and a mile on each side, but everything that stood on that land and everything in the land. All the coal, all the metal, whatever was there, all the lumber, whatever was theirs. Free. Not only free, you pay them. You pay them so many thousands of dollars for every mile of railroad they laid. It got so that they laid lines going this way, and they didn't connect. Because the more miles they built, the more money they got. So they built adjacent to each other. They were going to go to New York until the scale became too great, and they joined the railroad. But this doesn't happen while the slaveholders are in power. This happens when they're not in power. And they will not permit it. This enormous land which we are going to build up, who owns it? The federal government. What do we do with it? The new rising industrial bourgeoisie and the farmers of the West say, give it to us, give it to the farmers, give it away. Give it away. Why? So it be settled. And therefore become fruitful. And therefore you'll have a market. Oh, you must have a market. Otherwise you don't have capitalism. What do the peasants of Europe want? Land. What do we have? Land. They're coming here by the millions. Give them the land. What good is it? It is no good at all. We give you 160 acres of land if you settle it. And if you stay there 5 years and you build a home and raise a family, if you can do that for 5 years, at the end of the 5 years, it's yours. You didn't pay a dime. Talk about dreams. Go and do it. Over our dead bodies, say the slave owners. What do you mean, go and do it? We're going to take that land. That's for us. California, we're going to raise cotton in California. Our slaves will be in Arizona and New Mexico, not your European peasants, with free labor and building up free representatives in Congress and free senators in the Senate and changing the whole balance of power so that the non-slave holding classes have the control of the federal government. Never under us. Never do it. They never did it. And you don't get a Homestead Act till 1862 under Mr. Lincoln. A National Banking Act, a National Currency Act. You must have one single currency. Why must you say the planters of Alabama were perfectly happy with an Alabama dollar? We don't see the necessity. But you must have a national market. You cannot have money in Alabama discounted in Connecticut. Why not? Because it interferes with commerce. That's your commerce, not my commerce. We don't want one huge banking system nationally controlled by you goddamn Republicans. Never. And they don't have it until Mr. Lincoln becomes President of the United States. That's what we mean by force number one. That's what the Republican Party platform stands for. Transcontinental railroads, federal expense, Homestead Act, national banking, national currency, protective tariff. Exactly what the slave-owning class doesn't want. And this is precisely what wins in 1860. That's what I mean by causing desperation. They've won. They have the presidency. Now, how did they win? That's part of the transformation. They won because there is an enormous growth in the mercantile bourgeoisie as well as in the industrial bourgeoisie. And the mercantile bourgeoisie has, up to about 1850, been the backbone of the Democratic Party, of the party of the slavocracy. Why? Because the merchants haul the products of the slave owners. That's why. The merchants haul the products, the merchants insure the products, the merchants are the bankers of the slave-owning class. They're the creditors of the slave-owning class. There is therefore a unity between the commercial bourgeoisie and the plantation aristocracy, each serving the other. But as you get the growth of an industrial bourgeoisie in a free farming West, you get a new kind of mercantile bourgeoisie. You get a mercantile bourgeoisie which hauls the products of factories, which hauls the products of free farms, which hauls cattle and horses and wheat and corn and rye, and the products that are pouring out of the factories of the North. That's a new mercantile bourgeoisie. And it is one which challenges the old merchant bourgeoisie for domination. And it is one which is tied not with the slavocracy, but with the free labor West and the industrial bourgeoisie. And as railroads are built, the tie grows, and the railroads are built not into the South, but into the West, because that's where the market is. This means that the traditional base of the Democratic Party, the slave-owning class and the mercantile bourgeoisie, in the North, the mercantile bourgeoisie; in the South, the slave-holding class, which is the Democratic Party, splits. And the mercantile bourgeoisie of the North becomes dual. One of it, the traditional role of supporting the slavocracy, and the other, a new role, servicing the new industrial bourgeoisie and the free farmers of the West. That new mercantile bourgeoisie breaks from the old, and therefore challenges the old for supremacy of the Democratic Party. And therefore the Democratic Party splits. And in 1860 you have two Democratic parties. You have a Democratic Party of the South, which is traditional and feels that its candidate, the slave owner from Kentucky, John Breckinridge. And you have a Northern Democratic Party, separate organizationally, a separate convention, meets separately, and has a separate candidate, Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois. interested in free farming and railroad building. So Lincoln confronts not one party. If he had, he would lose. He confronts two parties. The new Republican Party does not confront the traditional Democratic Party. It confronts a split Democratic Party, and therefore it wins the election as a minority candidate, but most of the Electoral College. You see that point? That's also part of the transformation, part of number one, part of what makes the slave oligarchy desperate. They can't prevent that split, and not preventing the split, they can't win the election. Therefore they lose it, and therefore Lincoln is president, and therefore the Republican Party platform is about to be implemented. And that spells death to their economic and political supremacy in the United States, and they're not going to accept it. No ruling class does. If they accept it, they give up. What the hell for? Why should we give up? Let's fight. I repeat, if we fight and lose, we lose. We might win. And I'll tell you why they thought so. But if we don't fight, we lose. If we acquiesce in this, we're finished. Now we're finished particularly because of a central demand of this Republican Party, which I haven't told you about yet, although it is implicit in what I've told you. And that central demand is no further expansion of slavery. Now that's implicit in what I told you in terms of the use of the land, the Homestead Act, the railroad building, and so on and so forth. You cannot have free farmers and slavery. It's one or the other. And the Republican Party is saying free farmers, the development of market, industrial bourgeoisie, and no more slavery. Now we don't touch slavery where it is, because where it is guaranteed by the Constitution, we think. It's in the original Constitution, the agreement to slavery. We're not touching slavery in South Carolina. We're telling the slave owners of South Carolina, you don't come in Kansas. Not with slaves, you don't. You're welcome to it, not with your goddamn slavery. You don't come into Nebraska, you don't come in Arizona, New Mexico, California. No, sir. Utah. Finished. Stay where you are. Now, the Republican Party says we will guarantee slavery where it is. We won't touch slavery where it is. Abraham Lincoln says, I'll pass the 13th Amendment. So will the Republican-dominated Congress, which makes slavery perpetual where it is. We'll do that. That'll make you happy. The Republican Party in 1860 agrees we will make slavery perpetual where it is, but it may not go where it isn't. Big deal, say the slave owners. Thank you very much. You know what you are doing to us. You are murdering us. You are suffocating us. We must expand. We must expand for growth. We must expand because you're expanding. We must expand because you control Congress. We must expand because you're passing your program. And we must expand for another reason. Two other reasons. We have to move into new land because our slave cultivation uses up the land quickly. And we cannot afford fertilization, dry farming, fallow, and so on and so forth. That takes capital. We don't have capital. That 100 slaves, $100,000 capital. We don't have capital. We cannot have scientific farming. We need virgin soil, and you know it. Well, we may know it, but you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it. You're signing a death warrant. And not only that, there's something else. We've got to expand. Else we'll have a building up of the slave population within a restricted area. And then what will happen? I'll show you what will happen. You say you'll guarantee it where it is. Thank you very much. That's what you'll guarantee. You'll guarantee on murder. And you know it. We don't want to talk about it too much because it's contagious. But everybody knows it. But we don't want it. And the abolitionist movement is growing. because anti-slavery is growing in the North. It becomes more popular, less subversive, more meaningful, more sense. Yeah, that's right. They've been telling us that since 1830, 1840. Yeah. You go a little too far, but we understand you. A little too far, but we understand you. See, it's a different atmosphere. And therefore scores of thousands join. It becomes a mass movement. And the newspaper with the largest circulation in the United States by far, the New York Tribune, becomes practically an abolitionist newspaper, Greeley's paper, and employs Karl Marx and Frederick Engels as their main European correspondents. Both of them denouncing slavery every chance they have. But this is the great cancer of the Republic. Get rid of that, and there's no end to your growth. Don't get rid of it, and you're dead. All coming together, and Lincoln elected. That does it. December 1860, the secession movement begins. South Carolina is out. The secession movement is an unpopular movement in the South. It is an unpopular movement in the South. I'm talking about white people. Of course it's unpopular in slaves. But I'm talking about the 60-65% of the population white. Most of the white people are opposed to secession. Slave owners know it, therefore it's done secretly. Therefore, at the Montgomery Convention, they discussed, should it be put to a plebiscite? They're talking about white people. Most of them with property. No, it should not be put to a plebiscite secession. Why not? They tell us why not. Their proceedings have since been published. We will not put it to a vote to the white people in the South because they'll reject it. Therefore, they don't put it to a vote. And therefore, you create the Confederate States of America. You pass martial law. You pass conscription acts. And this way you raise an army. You raise an army by a fist. There's much illusion about army, about war. I find much illusion. If you have the power, there's no difficulty getting an army. You just say, we are conscripting you into the army. You don't serve, you're shot. That's all. You don't have to do anything else. You have the power, you have the state, you have the apparatus, you have the propaganda, you have the church, you have everything, you have the law. Hey, Joe Blow, you're in the army, do you know that? I don't want to go. We didn't ask you if you want to go. You're in the army. You report on such and such a date, such and such a place, and that's it. If you're not there, we'll come get you. You have an army. Now, the easiest thing to do when you're in the army is to fight. The hardest thing to do is not to fight. Because that's what the army is doing. Everybody in the army is fighting. You're shooting in that direction. Why are you shooting in that direction? Because the officer tells you to shoot in that direction. Everybody in line is shooting there. I'm shooting there too. As long as you're shooting there, nobody bothers you. You might get killed, but that's another matter. If you stop shooting there and somebody's going to come over and ask you, what's the matter? You run out of ammunition, you need more ammunition. What do you mean you don't want to shoot there? We're not asking you whether you want to shoot or not. You're in the army, brother. You shoot. I don't want to shoot. Well, then we'll shoot you. Oh, you're a young man. What do you mean you don't want to? Don't be silly. That's all. And they had 3 conscription acts, each one more onerous than the other, although they did not conscript men. They left men, 1 for 20 and finally 1 for 15. 1 for every 15 slaves on a plantation, you exempt 1 white man. Although they needed white soldiers something terrible, they exempted in the beginning 1 for 20 and then 1 for 15. So they had an army. Now, one of the remarkable things about that army is the extent of desertion. The hardest thing in the world to do in the army is to desert. Not go AWOL. AWOL is something else. You're tired, or there's a girl nearby, or something. And you intend to come back, and if you're in combat, the officer has any sense, he forgets it. kid left for 3 days, he's back, that's the end of it. Forget about it. Sergeant, just forget about it. But desertion, that's something else. Kid's gone, hasn't come back. And desertion to the enemy, oh, brother, that's very serious. And that is the most difficult. To desert to the enemy is the most difficult thing a soldier can do. Much more difficult than win a Congressional Medal of Honor, which is always by luck. Now, 100,000 Confederate troops deserted. A very large percentage of that, we don't know how many, went over to the Union Army and fought in the Union Army. It was a very remarkable figure. There was a large number of AWOLs in the Union Army, but they were not desertions. And they didn't go to the Confederate Army. But a very large number of Confederate troops went over to the Union forces, a very large number. In addition, a very high percentage of Southern men joined the Union Army originally. There were more men in the Union Army from Kentucky than there were from Maine. There were more from Tennessee than were from Vermont. And when you have a military history, if you have the 1st Tennessee Infantry, you don't have just the 1st Tennessee Infantry, you have 1st Tennessee Infantry CSA, Confederate States of America. Why? Because there's a 1st Tennessee Infantry USA. That's why. You don't have the 2nd Alabama Rifles. You have the 2nd Alabama Rifles CSA because there's a 2nd Alabama Rifles USA. That's why. Whole states refused secession. That's why you have West Virginia. It's 1863. They left the Confederacy. Whole counties never participated. Liberty and Union County in Mississippi. That's why they're called Liberty and Union County to this day. And they were anti-Confederate. The mountain counties of Georgia were anti-Confederate. North Carolina, anti-Confederate. Tremendous bread riots of women in the Confederacy. Great disaffection of the Confederacy. In my opinion, that's the fundamental reason for the defeat of the Confederacy. Disaffection. And of course, among the black people, about 165,000 slaves fled, succeeded in fleeing. An enormous total. Over 200,000 black men fought in Lincoln's army. About 25,000 in the Navy. The details of that are in my book, To Be Free, which is out of print. I don't know why. I can't do anything about it apparently. But it's in libraries, To Be Free. And there's a long chapter on casualties, black casualties in the Civil War. And there's a chapter on the Negro in the Union Navy. And there's a study of these things. It's about 200,000 black men in Lincoln's army. Some of the units were integrated. Most of them were not. I discovered integration by accident. It takes me too long to tell you about it. But about 20,000 black men were in integrated units. About 180,000 were in what they call the U.S. Colored Infantry. There were a few black officers, very few. 1 or 2 reached the rank of lieutenant colonel. I'd like to say a few words about the Confederate hope of victory. Part of it came from an arrogance of a militaristic, aristocratic oligarchy. That one of them could kill 10 Yankees and other such nonsense. But the basic thing came from their calculation as to European support. That they would have the support of the reactionary government of England, the Palmerston government, and of Napoleon the Little in France, and with that support, break the Union blockade of cotton, get the British to build their navy, get the French and the British to lend them millions, get the Vatican to recognize their existence, and win. Especially the Confederates knew there was a divided North, a racist North, a North in which the combined Democratic vote almost equaled that of the Republican vote, a treasonous North, as in large parts of Indiana, as in New York City, as in much of New York State. Depending upon that and European support and the alleged superiority of Confederate fighting power and also the real superiority of Confederate officership, because slavery militarized the society of the South, and all the Southern white leaders were trained militarily for colonels and majors, not for euphony, but in fact, like Colonel Robert E. Lee. And many of the officers betrayed their oath and went over to the Confederacy. That was true in the Navy, too. By the way, it's not true of the enlisted men. Someone ought to make a study of that. None of the enlisted U.S. Army troops went over to the Confederacy, but a large number of the officers did. Under Buchanan, the Secretary of War, John Floyd of Virginia, was a traitor. He emptied the armories of the North and sent the weapons south. The Secretary of the Navy, Isaac Towsey of Maryland, was a traitor. He sent the fleet to the four corners of the world, so that it took Lincoln 5 months to get the fleet back when he became president to start the war against the South. So that the United States became heavily dependent upon importing weapons from Great Britain, especially heavy weapons, which had a positive side to it because it led some of the industrial bourgeoisie of England to favor the Union force, the Union cause, so that the British bourgeoisie was split. But most of the British bourgeoisie were delighted with sinking U.S. commercial vessels, the tonnage of which was beginning to challenge the British for world domination by the time of 1860. And every Yankee ship we sank through the Confederate Navy said the British was so much the better for us. Wilson enjoyed the first 2 years of World War I every time a German submarine sank an English commercial vessel. Bring us closer to parity. And then a great source of hope by the Confederacy was Mexico, because France was in the process of rebuilding its American empire and therefore imposed Maximilian on Mexico, and Mexico was in rebellion against the reactionary regime of Santillana with the great genius Benito Juarez, the Indian, leading the national independence struggle for the integrity of Mexico against homegrown traitors and the French, and fighting brilliantly, and fighting for years, and fighting in 1867, winning. And that war for the independence of Mexico is fought against the French. And if the French win, then the Confederacy has 1,500 miles of common border in Texas, and the United States never will defeat the Confederacy. How the hell are you going to blockade land 1,500 miles? You can't. Therefore, Lincoln supports Juarez. And so you have the refreshing example of the United States government supporting real guerrilla fighters, real fighters for human freedom and for independence and integrity. The correspondence between Lincoln and the great Juarez, and both depending upon the other. The irony of history, we had just dismembered Mexico in the 1840s, and here Juarez was fighting for the life of the United States. And so the United States was supporting this great guerrilla fighter, the great Benito Juarez. And he was successful and helped save the Republic. And the plot of France to take back Haiti is overcome by Lincoln, because Lincoln lets France know that this will be considered an act of war. And the final act of Lincoln in this connection is the recognition of Haiti. As soon as Haiti became an independent black republic, of course, it disappeared in the Caribbean. It no longer existed. The United States couldn't find it, and never did find it for 50 years. And then Lincoln suddenly discovered it. We better recognize it. We better treat it as a republic, else France will invade it. And they're already in Mexico, and if they take Haiti too, we'll lose the Caribbean. And we will become a second-rate power. The Confederacy will win. So Lincoln suggests to the cabinet that we recognize Haiti. Most of the cabinet says it's impossible, Mr. President. Why is it impossible? Well, if we recognize Haiti, Haiti will send a minister here. Yes, that's what usually happens. So who will meet the minister? Well, usually the president meets the minister. Will you meet the minister? Yes, I'll meet him. Will you shake hands with him, or will you wear gloves? And God forbid, he may be married, God forbid. God save us. Suppose the Mr. Minister has a Mrs. Minister, and we have a state dinner. And they come and they join us at dinner, what will we do? It's all right if a black man serves us soup, even if he has his thumb in the soup. That's one thing. But we can't have a black man and a woman sitting at the table and eating soup with us, can we? Well, said Lincoln, it looks as though we can. It looks as though we must. I'll be at the head of the table. I guarantee you I will not throw up or cause any difficulty. And I will meet the minister of Haiti. And we will recognize Haiti. And the White House will still stand, and by the way, be white. And they did. And in this way also foiled some of the plans of Louis Napoleon. The Southern forces fought better than the North in the first years of the war because they had better officers. You may think officers are unnecessary, but this seems to be false. And you seem to require officers who know what the hell an army is and what to do with a battalion, and which end of an artillery piece fires and which doesn't. We finally got him in that old drunkard, Ulysses S. Grant. They reported to Lincoln that he drank something awful. Lincoln said, "What brand does he drink? I'll give it all by jet rules." But he was a military genius. He knew how to fight and was merciless, ruthless, which you have to be, I assure you, in war. You've got to take a hill. You have to tell the men you have to take the hill. You can say, "Follow me," that's all right, but you've got to follow me now. So there's nothing worse than war, folks. And Grant was great at it. Now, fundamental to the saving of the Union was the black soldiers. 200,000. Lincoln said, if we didn't have them, we'd lose the war. When Grant was moved from the Army of the Tennessee to the vital front of the Army of Virginia in 1863, the end of the year, he made one request. He said, "I want to take with me the U.S. colored troops I got." And Lincoln said, "You take them with you." When the Union forces took Richmond, the first troops entering Richmond was the 29th United States Colored Infantry. Colored men were the first to enter the capital of the Confederacy. There's a certain marvelous drama to history. Some Indians rebelled, saw their opportunity to rebel. Lincoln was ruthless. Ruthless. One of the worst features of his administration was his war upon the Indians. He threatened the possibility of the Union. Of course, the Indians didn't give a goddamn one way or another, the Confederacy of the United States. They saw their chance and went to war, and Lincoln put each one of them to the knife. There's not very much written about that for rather obvious reasons. We have here then a revolutionary struggle. The revolutionary quality becomes obvious as the war proceeds. You can't win without the black people, and you can't win without destroying slavery. Now, it's an interesting thing about the black people. We're going to make soldiers of them. Are we? Well, they're volunteering. They're storming into the forces. They're demanding the right to fight. The governor of Iowa writes to Abe Lincoln and says, "Look, I don't love," you know what he said, "I don't love them," he didn't say them, "any more than any other man. But I don't hate them so much that I won't let them get killed too, if they want to get killed." That's a little excessive. I don't hate them that much. They want to get killed with us, let them come in and get killed. So they were permitted to join the Army and the Navy, and they flock. They volunteer by the scores of thousands. They're led by people like Douglas with his great speech, which you'll find in my documentary history, "Men of Color to Arms." If we fight, they cannot deny us freedom. If we fight, they cannot deny us freedom. If we get a gun, they cannot deny us freedom. Man of color to arms. Great speech, one of the great speeches in the English language. 2 of his sons volunteered. 1 was killed. They fight very well. They have a 35% higher mortality casualty rate than the whites. They're on the line longer. They have poorer weapons, poorer officers, most of them white. So they fight with a very high morale for obvious reasons. They have a higher rate of Congressional Medals of Honor than the white troops. And they just enjoy killing the Confederacy. Now, they weren't given that opportunity easily. First they're let in, put in uniform, mustered in. What are we going to do with them? Well, sometimes they're getting shovels. They're getting weapons. All right, now they got weapons, what are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with them? No point sending them to Nova Scotia. You mean we'll send them to Alabama? Well, that's where the fighting is, isn't it? I know that's where the fighting is, but these are white men fighting. I know these are white men fighting, and these are black men with weapons. And we're going to send them down there to kill white men. That's why we hung John Brown, isn't it? Yeah, but that was in 1859. It was 1862 now. We have no alternative. What do you want to do with the black men? You have any suggestions? We're not winning, and they want to fight. And there's 200,000 of them. Let them fight. Okay, we'll put them in uniform, we'll muster them in, we'll give them a rifle, we'll send them to fight, but we won't pay them the same. The white recruits pay $10 a month. We'll pay them 7. Pay them 7. Whole regiments of the black troops say, look, Uncle Sam doesn't have the extra $3, keep it. We'll fight for nothing. And the families and the abolitionists raised to held bazaars and so on to feed families. The men fought for nothing. They line up every month before the paymaster, salute, take the envelope and give it back. Uncle Sam needs it. Here's the $7. We'll fight for nothing. They did that until 1864, when I'm very glad to report there's so little good news in this history of black people that Congress finally was shamed into equalizing pay retroactively. And they got all of $10 a month. If I'm not mistaken, that's what I started with. You were the treasurer, and I get about $10 a month, something like that. They kept that rate of pay for a long time. Maybe we got a little more, not much more. He didn't marry me until I became an officer. It was purely financial consideration. I had $60 and she had $300. So you see who got the better of the deal. Those were the days, brothers.
And sisters.
Huh?
And sisters.
Yeah, and sisters too. She's always after me.
Amazing.
Always after me, always correcting me, quite correctly. Okay, brothers and sisters, those were the days. Now the war starts in April. 125 years ago, almost to the day. The war ends in April. People start killing each other just when the flowers come up. Most wars start around April, some of them in August. Lately we're getting later. But when the spring comes, the days get a little longer. Young men kill each other. The war ended in April. I didn't tell you about the Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation Proclamation is forced from the administration which understands that without ending slavery you cannot save the Union. The Cabinet is opposed to it. Probably a majority of the Northern press is opposed to it. But Lincoln realizes it must be done, and Lincoln does it. He does it, by the way, it's a military act, of course. He's commander-in-chief. And only a military act is important during war. But he says this is also an act of justice, which is rarely used in the military order. It's an act of justice. It's issued in September to take effect in January 1. He gives the southern states 100 days to lay down their arms. I give you 100 days. If you lay down within that 100 days, I don't touch slavery. If you don't, I issue this Emancipation Proclamation in final form and all the slaves are free. You got 100 days. And the days go on. And the killing goes on. And of course, the oligarchy doesn't lay down arms. It doesn't give up slavery. That's the whole point. At midnight, December 31, 1862 comes. And there's an enormous meeting of black people with Frederick Douglass in the chair in Rochester, thousands. Midnight is approaching. Is he going to sign the proclamation? Telegraph existed then. Brothers and sisters were waiting. If he signs it, the news will come to us. As the clock comes to midnight, a great hush, and a messenger appears and brings a slip of paper to Douglass. And Douglass says he has done it. Great Jubilee. The day of Jubilee is here. No more auction block. It's one of the great days in history. It's like the day the Nazis surrendered at Stalingrad. It's like the day Buchenwald was freed. It's like the day I stood in Paris on May Day, 1945. What a day. There are such days in history. And they come because of struggle. And this is one of them. Oh my God, the tears that were shed. The prayers that were offered. And he signed it. In April, Lincoln entered Richmond. I'm going to read it to you. There was a black man, his name was Hill, I think. Yeah, J.J. Hill. Soldier in the 29th Connecticut Colored Infantry Regiment. April 1, 1865, Lincoln enters. No, they take the city April 1, the 3rd. April 3rd, Lincoln comes. Comes in a boat. When the president landed, there was no carriage. He didn't wait for one. But leading his son, they walked a mile to General Weitzel's headquarters at Jefferson Davis's old mansion. The colored man acting as guide. 6 soldiers, black they were, dressed in blue, with their carbines for the advance guard. Next to them came President Lincoln and his little son, Admiral Porter, flanked by other officers right and left. Then followed thousands of people, most of them colored. What a spectacle. I never witnessed such rejoicing in all my life. As the people passed along the street, the colored people waved their handkerchiefs, hats, and bonnets, and expressed their gratitude, shouting, "Thank God! Thank God!" All could see Lincoln. He was so tall. One woman, black she was, standing in the doorway as he passed along, shouted, "Thank you, Jesus." Another one, blacker, standing by her side, clapped and shouted, "Bless the Lamb, bless the Lamb." Lincoln walked in silence, nodding. He was a man of the people, among the people. He was a great deliverer among the delivered. He wept. He offered a short speech. This is what he said. In reference to you, colored people, let me say God made you free. Although you have been deprived of your God-given rights by your so-called masters, you are now as free as I am. And if those that claim to be your superiors do not know that you are free, take the sword, take the bayonet, and teach them that you are free. For God created all men free, giving to each the same rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The gratitude and admiration amounted almost to worship with which the colored people received the president. It touched his heart. He went among the poor without pomp or pride, by himself holding the boy as a private citizen. He came not as a great conqueror, but as a private citizen. That's a great moment. Well, there is no end to history, but I'm going to end it with a great poem. Our greatest poet is Whitman. Whitman's brother was wounded in the war. Whitman served as a nurse in the war. He saw the war. He smelled it. He wrote two great poems when Lincoln was murdered. The greatest is When Lilacs Last Bloomed in the Dooryard. But it's a very long poem. If you don't know it, read it. When Lilacs Last Bloomed. This is a shorter one. Oh, Captain, my Captain. On April 14, 1865, just after Lee had surrendered, Lincoln was shot in the head by a pro-Confederate maniac. He died on April 15. The country stood still, like when Roosevelt died. We were firing on Dusseldorf when he died. I'll never forget that day. Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every wrack. The prize we sought is won. The port is near. The bells I hear. The people all exulting. While follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But, oh, heart, heart, heart. Oh, the bleeding drops are red. Around the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Captain, my Captain, rise up, hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribbon wreaths, for you the shores are crowding, for you they call. The swaying mass, their eager faces turning, here, Captain, dear Father, this arm beneath your bleeding head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer, his lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm, he has no pulse, no will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells. But I, with mournful tread, walk the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Fallen cold and dead. And living forever. Living forever. I tell you that something runs my blood cold is when I think of Reagan sleeping in the same house with Lincoln. It's a goddamn scandal. That's the Civil War.
Well, I'm a real cynic, and you've kind of gone out of your way, I think, to characterize the things that happened that were good as kind of motivated by those people, whereas what I get the impression of is that they were trying a very expedient way to look for profit. You know, that the North was pressuring the presidency and so forth to fight for its battles. Would you like to talk about that a little bit more, how you characterize what went on, so that when they say, you know, that Lincoln freed the slaves, was he a good guy or were they just opportunists?
It's closer to the truth to say that the slaves freed themselves rather than Lincoln freed the slaves. I tried to make that clear. But it's dialectical. It's a historical process. But without the participation of the black people, it's difficult to see how the Union would have been preserved. And if the Union wasn't preserved, then slavery could not have been abolished. But the chief executive officer in this accomplishment was Abraham Lincoln. There's nothing cynical about it. There's nothing really cynical about history. History can be studied as a science. Things have a certain inevitability about it. Lincoln said that he was carried along by the forces of history. So did Lenin, by the way. They both said practically the same thing. It isn't a question so much of good and bad. It is a question of progressive and reactionary. And the industrial bourgeoisie in this period, vis-a-vis the plantation oligarchy, represents progress versus reaction. And one of the features of progress is the enhancement of human well-being. It does not have to mean the complete accomplishment of human well-being. That's very rare, but it does mean the enhancement. And the Civil War is one of the great progressive wars in human history, because it cannot be won without a revolutionary transformation. Now, you sometimes get a kind of a cynical approach where they will say, well, the Emancipation Proclamation was just a military act. Well, that misses the whole point. What do you mean it was just a military act? It was an act taken in the middle of a war. So of course it's a military act. That's the only kind of an act that has any goddamn meaning in a war. If it's a war, it's a military act. And Lincoln is acting, he is anti-slavery. But he made very clear that he's not acting out of that temperament. He's acting as the chief executive officer of the United States of America, pledged to the duty of preserving the unity. And he has come to the conclusion that you cannot preserve the unity and keep slavery. And when he comes to that conclusion, he ends slavery. Now it happens that he was delighted to do so. That's just a fact, a biographical fact. But the historiographical fact is that he had to do so. Otherwise he'd lose the war. And he knew it. And he was statesman enough first to realize it and second to do it. And to do it in the only way he could, namely a military order. The slaves were the property of rebels. He took away the property of the rebels. Perfectly legal. Now, an interesting feature, while I'm on that, is the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment is, of course, passed after the war in December 1865. And the 13th Amendment confiscates billions of dollars worth of property. Confiscates it. And there's no due process of law. It's one of the great revolutionary acts in human history. It's more revolutionary than Castro. Castro finally confiscated the property of the great monopolies, AT&T, Electric Bond, and so on, but he offered to pay them. And he said, I'll make a deal with you. I will compensate you. I'll pay you what you paid in taxes under Batista. You paid according to assessed valuation. Right? That was the assessment. I'll pay you that assessment. You functioned that way for generations. Anything wrong with that? Now, if you feel that the assessment was too low, that's all right. We can talk about that. You tell me what you want me to pay you. What is the assessment? I see. You think it's worth that much, do you? Well, of course, then you'll pay back taxes on that valuation.